Hi, my name is Gordon West. I'm a graduate student in second language acquisition at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm also a member of the AAAL Graduate Student Council on the subcommittee for social media. Today, we're talking about writing conference proposals, and I'm here with Dr. Anna Defina, professor and chair of the Italian department at Georgetown University. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Anna Defina, as Gordon said. I am chair of the Italian department at Georgetown University. I'm also affiliated with the linguistics department. So there, my main area of specialization is sociolinguistics, particularly in studies of narrative, identity. I also work a lot on migration and superdiversity, and more in general, discourse analysis. And I guess I've been invited here because I was for the last 2 years the coordinator of the strand, which is called Analysis of Discourse and Interaction.
Thank you very much for being with us today. So we're filming this interview right now in the middle of conference proposal season. And writing successful conference proposals is one of the many important challenges that graduate students face. And I think it can be particularly challenging for large conferences like AAAL. So the number one question on the frequently asked questions page on AAAL is about how to choose a strand. And readers are given guidance to the link to the strand description page, and they're told to read the strand descriptions. And despite that guidance, I think that choosing a strand is often really difficult for graduate students. So I wonder if you could give us some advice on how to choose a strand for graduate students who might be unsure of where they might fit.
Yes, I just wanted to share my screen because we can take a look at the, sometimes we can take a look at certain details. For example, I took here, you have a list of the strands. So first of all, let me tell you that not only graduate students, everybody has that kind of difficulties because there are many areas that are interdisciplinaries or areas that touch each other. For example, in my case, analysis of discourse and interaction, a lot of times you have stuff that could belong there, but could also belong, for example, to corpus linguistics, or could belong in language and ideology, or could belong in pragmatics. So because there are different aspects that we are studying in a paper or in a dissertation or whatever is the source of your presentation. So in my case, for example, I had to exclude my first strand, which was discourse, for my own abstract, because I was the coordinator of the strand, so I couldn't present it. So I had to go with the second choice. How do you make the second choice? Think of the different areas that you work on in your paper or your presentation, and think that, in terms of that, maybe it's a paper on identity, but maybe you're using a certain kind of methodology, or maybe you are touching on ideologies while you talk about identity, or vice versa. It's a topic on pragmatics, but you're also touching upon questions that have to do, again, with bilingualism or ideology. So you can try to think, rather than the description of the of the strands, think in terms of the problems, the issues, and the tools that you use in your own paper. This is what I would do. But I also want to tell you something. This is not life or death, in the sense that the strand coordinator can, first of all, assign the paper to another coordinator if they think that it has nothing to do with the strand. And that's extremely rare. I mean, usually, you find the papers that are more or less in that area, and that's fine. We're not super worried about putting things in a box, unless they are really, really out of the main, topics and things that aspects that that area deals with. Then, but we can always move, and we do. We said, oh no, this has nothing to do with discourse. It has to do with second language acquisition. So you send it to the other coordinators. So take it easy.
Oh, that's really reassuring to hear. I guess I'd never thought that that could happen. So it's great to know that that it's not a sort of high stakes decision like I think it might be perceived as.
No.
And so from your perspective as a strand coordinator, can you talk to us a little bit about what the review process is like? So you've talked a little bit already about if you get something that might belong to a different strand, you can send it along. But if you get something that fits in the strand, what does the review process look like from there?
Yes. So the coordinator receives all the abstracts. At the same time, of course, we have a list of reviewers that get more or less renewed every year. So what we try to do, and we assign a certain number of abstracts to each reviewer, depending, of course, on the number of reviewers and the number of papers. Usually the maximum a reviewer has to read is 8, usually 8 abstracts. And of course, less if they have to also read the colloquium. Every paper, every proposal, let's say, has at least 2 reviewers, initially 2 reviewers, who have the list of criteria, and we can go over the list of criteria together in a minute. But first, let me talk to you about the mechanics. So you, as a coordinator, I assign the papers to the list of people I have. And I also try as much as I can, and I think my colleagues do the same, to assign papers based a little bit on what I know that the reviewer knows. Because even, in an area like discourse, you can work on very, very different aspects of discourse. So luckily, usually we know each other more or less. So I try as a coordinator to pair, the topic with the reviewer as much as it's possible. So the reviewers go to the criteria, which we will discuss in a minute, and then they assign, we have a scale of 1 to 5. I think it was last year. We assign a number according to how well we thought, the different areas were covered. And we also write a justification of why, why we gave that grade. Usually more for papers that don't have a great, let's call it grade, than for the ones that go really well. Usually there is agreement among the reviewers, but not always. So if there are very different reviews, then we ask in a second phase of the reviews, we ask a third person or even a fourth if we continue to have different positions to review the paper and give a grade. And then at the end, the coordinator, if it's a controversial issue, it's the coordinator who usually decides how, to evaluate the paper. Most of the time people agree more or less, but there are always cases where they don't agree. And again, so we try to be, as transparent as possible and to have different reviews. The criteria: appropriateness and significance of the topic, issue, problem, expectation of original research, research design, if empirical study, and analytical approach, conceptual framework, if a conceptual study, and manner of presentation. So these criteria, of course, all criteria are a little bit holistic. So even if you give a number, a grade, you judge holistically. So the appropriateness and significance of the topic has to do with the topic of the conference. If the topic, it's important that the paper has some relationship, not only with the strand, but also with the general topic of the conference. Again, this is not life and death. It could not be very, very appropriate to that conference, but it could be very well done in other respects. So all these criteria are relative to each other. But generally, we expect that if the conference is, I don't know, on social justice, then the paper will have something to do with it. Original research, of course, we don't want, we want the evidence that this is done, this has been done, the research has been done by the person who proposes it, that it's original, is not copied, or at least is not something that everybody knows already, and there's nothing new to say, so what is new? That's one of the ideas too. And then, of course, how well the research design is proposed, is done, and if it's not an empirical paper, how well the hypothesis or the topic is supported, the research in general is supported theoretically. And finally, is it clear? Is it well organized? Is it confusing? Does it have research questions? That kind of information also is important. So all these criteria enter in our judgment. And usually they also go together, in the sense that usually a proposal that is well written is also clear, is also appropriate, etc. I don't know, Gordon, if I answered or...
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really good answer, and it's really good to kind of go through some of these criteria that the proposals are being evaluated on. And I'm wondering, as a strand coordinator, are there any sort of common mistakes that you see that are made that might lead to a proposal being rejected?
Yes, there are. One of them is, there are various things that I see all the time. One of them is the lack of focus. Like we always ask, I myself ask, what is the question here? The people tend to, sometimes they ask too many questions. They want to deal with too many problems. They're not specific enough. So one thing that is important is to think, what is the research question I'm trying to answer here? So be specific in that area. That's super important. A second issue that I see many times is that the research design is not clear. That's another thing that is very important. So sometimes you see very vague things, like I'll do some qualitative analysis of, okay, what kind of qualitative analysis? Okay, what kind of data you have? Because we look for a sense of what the research actually was. The lack of the specificity often makes you think that the research has not been done, that this person has written the abstract on the spur of the moment, but doesn't actually have anything yet. Which is fine if you say it from the beginning. This is an experimental study, is not being concluded. These are the preliminary, results. Try to give a sense that, yes, maybe the study is not finished, but you have something, you have a methodology, you have questions. And I'm not talking about experimental, because I'm not an experimental person either. But even if it's a qualitative study, the specificity, being a little more precise, will definitely help than being very vague and wanting to, cover too much. Finally, so say it. I'm using Bactin. I'm using, I don't know, Tannin. Whatever you're doing, it's important to be specific as much as you can. Or I'm using such and such concept, and this is my data. The data, you have to specify what data you have, how you're going to analyze. Basically, these are the two things. And then the manner of presentation, you have to be clear as possible. So coherent. So you first put, this is the topic I'm going to analyze. This is my data. This is the way I'm going to analyze it. Try to organize it in a way that is clear, to think that the person reading your proposal doesn't know anything about it. So don't give anything for granted. I know it's hard to put all these things together, but this is what we look for.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are things that I struggle with too. And I think a lot of graduate students with sort of writing proposals that might seem vague, and the fact that the proposals are due so far in advance of the conference. I think oftentimes we have studies that aren't completed yet that might be in progress. And so it's hard to find a way to learn how to talk about those. So that's really helpful. Do you have any other sort of general advice that you would want to give for writing a successful proposal?
Yeah, maybe I haven't talked about colloquia. Colloquia also colloquia are judged a little bit in the same way. So it's very important for the person who organizes the colloquium to try and give it unity, to try and give it coherence, at least in the general description of the colloquium. Sometimes you see a title, a colloquium title, and then the papers are very not so related to each other. So it's very important to do that. Yes, no, I think I've said everything. Again, I wanted to stress that you don't need to have a complete research, because all of us do that. You know, sometimes it's a year early or 9 months early, and you're doing the study. But if you are doing the study and give a sense of how you're doing it, then I don't think people will say, oh no, you know, I want a complete, but you can give a sense of, okay, I have some results, or I have some hypotheses, or I have, you know, some data that I can highlight, etc. So I think that should be sufficient. I also forgot to say an important point. There is little space for always too little space for acceptance. So sometimes you get rejected not because it wasn't good enough. Sometimes you get rejected because the few that were chosen were very, very, very good. You know, that's what happens too, that they tell us you can only accept X number of proposals. And it's very stressful even for us to make those decisions. Well, we don't make the ultimate decision, but so there's a lot of gray areas, and so that's why if you manage to write a stellar abstract, then it's easier than if you are in between.
Okay, yeah, that is good to know also. And yeah, I think that that's always a concern with space being an issue, and it's good to know that your rejection might not be solely based on how you wrote the abstract. The last thing that I wanted to ask you about is graduate student involvement in the review process itself. So should graduate students get involved in the review process by applying to be reviewers? And if so, what can they gain, and what should they do to prepare for the review process?
So I really think it is great for for graduate students to participate in this process. And in fact, we did encourage graduate students last year, and I've always encouraged them to take part in this kind of exercise, because it does give you an idea, a much clearer idea of how to write an abstract after you read 8 of them. And you see, you know, and then you also sometimes have to read others on which people are not sure. You really get a sense of what is a good proposal. Why am I giving this guy, you know, the maximum, and this guy not? just looking at the process will help you write your proposal better. Secondly, of course, it's a very interesting way of having a sense of the field you're in, because you will see the kind of proposals that come in, and a lot of times it will give you also a very clear understanding of where the field is going, because you have, I don't know, 8 or 10 proposals to read, usually 8, 5 of which are on translanguaging, like, okay, that's the topic people are really working on at the moment. So I think it's a great exercise. And to prepare, what can you do? I think there's not a lot you can do to prepare, but you can definitely go to the website and do exactly what I did here, which is look at the criteria that the organization puts forth and think about them, so that, try to understand them. If you don't, or if you have doubts, you can always write to your strand coordinator and ask for advice, or even to the other reviewer, because you're usually paired with another reviewer, and see, what, if they can give you some tips. But I think, Gordon, that most graduate students are perfectly capable of doing this. In fact, they're more in touch with the recent research than us. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Well, thank you very much for all of your advice on writing successful proposals. And thank you everyone for watching, and good luck on your own proposal writing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yep.